This is Channel 12, serving the tri-state area. Stay tuned now for a special broadcast of the 1984 Delaware campaign debates. Because of this program, Doctor Who will not be seen tonight. But watch for the doctor when he returns Monday at 7:30 p.m. here on 12. And now, live from our studios in Wilmington, a Channel 12 News special election report.
The 84 debates. Tonight, two races. Governor of Delaware and Newcastle County Executive, with candidates for the Democratic nomination. Good evening. I'm Pat Downs. Welcome to the second in a series of 5 debates scheduled here on Channel 12 before the November elections. There are only 2 days remaining before voters go to the polls in the primary elections on Saturday. Tonight, once again, we've invited candidates involved in primary races for 2 offices to participate. The first half of this program we're devoting to the Democratic gubernatorial candidates. But before I proceed, I would like to mention that former Governor Sherman Tribbett has declined our invitation to appear. In a 500-word statement delivered to Channel 12 today, Mr. Tribbett cited 2 reasons. One, he claims his opponent, Bill Quillen, has refused to endorse him and a Democratic ticket should Tribbett win the primary. And secondly, Mr. Tribbett claims that Mr. Quillen is against an open primary and therefore not in support of the Democratic Party. So, for those reasons, Mr. Tribbett will not be appearing tonight. Now, I'd like to begin this program by introducing our first guest and candidate, Mr. Bill Quillen. Mr. Quillen is vying for the Democratic nomination for governor. He's a former Supreme Court justice, and he currently practices law in the city of Wilmington. On my left are tonight's panelists. First, Janine Jaquet, our political correspondent for News 12. John Taylor, the editorial page editor for the Wilmington News Journal papers. And Mr. Tom Troy, political writer for the Delaware State News. We'll begin our questioning now. The first question going to Janine Jaquet. Janine?
Thanks, Pat. Mr. Quillen, I would like to open with a topic that you have said is your #1 priority, and that's education. You have said you support raising teachers' salaries and want to see the disparity in salaries between the wealthier and the poorer districts eliminated. But legislation now in place dictates that the poorer districts will only get more money from the state if taxes are increased at the local level. My question to you is, if you were governor, would you support legislation that would allow local school boards to increase taxes without a referendum if it appeared that referendums were not passing?
I think that would be a mistake, generally. We have a great tradition in this country of local control of schools. I think the public would object to that with great fierceness. And I think what we need is leadership that goes out and tries to persuade the public that what we ought to do is pass some of these, and that's happening. So the answer is no.
What sort of leadership qualities do you think that you have that you could encourage the local school districts to raise their own taxes? That's a tough thing to do, to get somebody to say, yes, I want my taxes to be higher.
Well, if you believe in better schools, I don't think it's beneath the governor to go out in the local school district when they're having a referendum and say, I support it. This present governor hasn't done that, but I don't believe that's beneath the governor. I think a governor ought to be open to doing that if he thinks that's what ought to be done. I'm supporting the teachers. I think the teachers have some obligation, but we've let teacher salaries slip in Delaware, and we've got to see what the most recent legislation made up and see where we stand. But we want to get back in the top 10 in teacher salaries so we can compete and have good schools. And I think it's that simple.
Thank you, Mr. Quillen.
All right, thank you. Mr. Taylor?
I'd like to pursue that again, Mr. Quillen. What's the realistic difference governmentally between an elected school board and the elected legislature? Why shouldn't a school board be able to set taxes?
They should be.
But they can't without referendum. The legislature's under no obligation to put every tax measure that they adopt before the people. Well, if they were, none would pass.
The difference is that I think the one area where you might get some action legislatively, realistically, if you want to talk realistically, is that you might have a minimum sometime that you'd have to come up with to qualify for certain state aid. That might be realistic. But to talk about doing away of referendum for school taxes generally, that's not realistic. And I don't think we ought to talk about it. It's a waste of time to talk about it because it's not going to happen.
Fine.
Okay. Tom?
Mr. Quillen, in response to former Governor Tribbitt's statement, he seems to have accused you throughout this campaign of being a closet Republican. I'd like to know how you respond to his reasons for not being here tonight.
Well, I think this is the second or third set of carefully composed reasons for not debating excuses, and it's excuses for the inexcusable. I mean, you know, we're having debates at all levels, local to presidential. I don't think we ought to dwell on it, but it's an inexcusable thing not to debate. If he had some points to make, he could come and make them in debate. The public has a right to know. They have a right to see him. They have a right to see him compared to me, and he's not giving them that chance, and it's really sad.
All right, we'll come back and start again with the second
I
round.
will support the entire Democratic ticket. I've said that publicly and privately. I will be at the Unity rally on Sunday, and I expect to be there a winner.
Okay, thank you. Janine?
There's been a lot of talk this year about attracting more blue-collar jobs to the state. You have suggested expanding operations at the Port of Wilmington, but the port is only one possible area of expansion. What other specific suggestions do you have for attracting blue-collar jobs here?
Well, I think we have to do a lot of things. I think we've got to try to support the legislators, both city councilmen and legislators who are supporting the retail business in the city of Wilmington. I think we've got to look at housing in the city of Wilmington. If we're going to develop the mall from 7th Street down, I think we're going to have to put some housing around it so you can have some walk-in business. You can support the mall from 8th Street up with luncheon business, but the mall is having trouble from 7th Street down. I think we've got to look at that again and face it. I think we ought to build the bypass. That has some blue-collar jobs for a long time. We've talked about the bypass. I think we ought to make a commitment to build it, figure out how we're going to finance it, and go on. I think we ought to try to find out who supplies the big companies that are in Wilmington, try to get some of those supply businesses to come here. I think we ought to try to appeal to light industry the best we can. It's a tough, competitive business. Anybody that goes out and promises a lot of jobs is talking through their hat because it's tough.
That's one of my points, is that it is very tough, especially when these jobs seem to be disappearing. Are there any concrete proposals that you have for how we can attract some of these?
Well, I'm the only one who's made any concrete proposals, with all due respect, and I've talked about the port. The port is going to remain labor-intensive for a long time because you're going to have bulk break cargo for a long time. What people have done with the port, they've done a survey and say it's going to take $100 million to do what's ideal out there. That's a mistake. What you ought to do is one step at a time, and you ought to take a look and see if a second crane is going to be valuable. All the people in private business, whether they be longshoremen or warehousemen or stevedores, all say the port can expand. They believe in the port. It's the lack of belief and commitment from the government that's holding it back, and it's going to take some money, but I believe in it too. And the reasons are simple to understand. I mean, the Delaware is better than the Christina because it's deeper and bigger ships can come in. A second crane is valuable because big cargo people don't want to risk downtime on one crane, and you can load and unload at the same time. I mean, a layperson can understand that. So it's not hard to understand. That's a meaningful suggestion.
I think you're right. I guess what I'm trying to get at is that aside from the port, where we have heard a specific suggestion from you, what else can you as governor do specifically to bring more blue-collar jobs?
Well, Janine, I've said that we need to reactivate the retail business in the city of Wilmington. We need to try to get some supplier business to come to the city of Wilmington. We need to put some pressure on the big companies to expand here again. The DuPont company has talked off and on in terms about having something in Kent County, for example, for years, and it's never been done. We ought to try to make that attractive and say they have an obligation to do it because this is their corporate home and they are part of this community as well as part of the world community. We ought to use persuasion and we ought to try to appeal to where those jobs are. And we ought to have our job training programs in the tech schools to support the jobs that are opening up. And we ought to try to develop the Wilmington-Newark corridor where you have the medical center, the University of Delaware, DuPont, Hercules, and ICI, land, and a road. Now, why that can't be developed, I don't know.
Okay. John?
Mr. Quillen, you indicated, I believe earlier this week, that you would support a study to take a look at the comparable worth, the discrepancies between male and female employees at the state level. Isn't that opening Pandora's box?
Well, there are two ways to do it, Minnesota or Washington. Anybody thinks it's not coming is a mistake because it's coming. I think it's an ideal time to look at it because the whole merits and personnel classification system the state needs to look at. And you could do the pay equity part of that on sex at the same time, and it could be part of a broader study. The administration has had a tendency to make exempt any job they considered important. And the merit system employees have a major morale problem in the state, and it's legitimate. So I favor a review of the entire merit system, the entire personnel classification system, and I would include in that pay equity.
Tom.
On the issue of the prisons, the Commissioner of Corrections believes that the prisons are overcrowded and has employed a number of controversial release programs to reduce the overcrowding. The Attorney General, on the other hand, thinks that those programs are making a mockery of the criminal justice system. Whose approach do you feel more familiar with or comfortable with?
Well, I don't know. If you're going to say one or the other of those two approaches, we've never had a decent classification system in our prisons, and that's been the big lack. Governor DuPont ran in 1976 on no more prisons, and he's built 4. I think we might have a great opportunity in the next few years to do something in corrections, simply because the number of people in the crime-prone age is going down. And if the number of people is going down, that does suggest that maybe we have a chance to go through an administration without building any more prisons. And maybe we have a chance to do something with classification with the ones we have. So I think the Commissioner has a point if he had a valid classification system. I think the Attorney General has a point because certainly public safety comes first. So the emphasis has to be on classification. We've never built a minimum security prison, a real minimum security prison. We build buildings that we call minimum security. But if you build a building and put it in Smyrna, that's not a minimum security prison, no matter what you call it. That's been the biggest need of the correctional institution. So you can have some controlled and some real control over people that you put out. But I don't know whether Gander Hill could ever be converted to that use or not. It is there. So you don't have the usual neighborhood problem, but not in my neighborhood. So I would say, Tom, to answer your question, the classification is the key to that. I believe in rehabilitation. I don't believe it's ever been tried. And I believe we ought to develop some programs in our prisons. I was the one judge that regularly visited the prisons. We haven't had good programs in prisons. One thing I'm particular on, I believe the educational resources of the state ought to take a role in the educational program at the prisons. I think part of the problem at the prisons has been that educational programs have been sporadic, lack continuity, and haven't done well. People come out of prisons. We have to make them come out better. The other thing we ought to emphasize, which I've talked about, as you know, is drugs. We ought to get back to the point we were in the late 60s and early 70s, where we had real emphasis on drug programs. 60 to 80% of violent crimes are drug-related.
John, did the response prompt the question?
Yeah. Do you think that the approach that the Governor's Commission that was headed by Mr. Swayze, that is essentially a classification system that's a long chain of rewards and punishments from essentially freedom for non-violent crimes to heavy long-term incarceration is an approach? I realize there's a commission studying that further, but do you think that's
I think it's a valid approach. I think the number of classifications are too many for people to grasp, and it's very difficult to understand that report. But yes, I think it's a valid approach. I think you have to be careful in talking about violent and non-violent offenders. If somebody breaks in your house and steals your television and you're not there so he doesn't hit you over the head, that doesn't make him a non-violent offender. So when you say that only 50% of our people in jail are violent offenders, that's not true. There are more than 50% of the people in jail are violent offenders, and the amount you can decrease is not as much as some of the reform people suggest.
We have time for one quick question. Janine?
I'd like to get back to education for a moment. Mr. Quillen, the state currently spends more than 1/3 of its budget on education. More programs and more money for teachers, as you have suggested, is going to obviously cost more money. It's got to come from somewhere. This is looking into the future, and I realize it's somewhat hard to answer, but if you were governor and you realized that in order to make necessary improvements in education, you would have to raise taxes, would you raise taxes in order to implement new programs or give teachers more money?
I don't see that in the next 4 years being necessary. I think we ought to make education the priority, number one. So for any growth in revenue, we'll go to education first.
All right, thank you very much. We have run out of time for this portion of the program. So I would like to thank Mr. Quillen for taking the time to appear, and also our panelists for participating in this segment. Now, we are going to bring on the guests for the second segment of our program tonight, the Democratic candidates seeking the nomination for Newcastle County Executive. Now, while that's happening, and it's happening right now here in the studios, this program is coming to you live, I would like to remind our studio audience and our viewers at home that this is the second of 5 special programs on the Delaware elections. The next round of debates will take place in about 6 weeks. On October 29th, incumbent Democrat Tom Carper will face off with Republican challenger Elise DuPont in the race for Delaware's lone congressional seat. Then, the following night, October 30th, it will be the incumbent Democrat Joseph Biden and Republican John Burris in our studios, answering questions about their race for the U.S. Senate. And then, on the 31st of October, Lieutenant Governor Michael Castle will face the winner of this Saturday's Democratic primary in the race for governor of the state of Delaware. As I said, we did have to change the formatting of the program owing to the fact that former Governor Sherman Tribbett declined our invitation here at Channel 12 to appear on the program. And I would like to remind you that Saturday is primary day, and of course we'll have coverage. Channel 12 will be covering the primary elections. We will have updates throughout the evening with a full report at 11 o'clock on Saturday evening, so I hope certainly that you'll be tuning in for that to see the outcome of the primary elections. There are a lot of primary races taking place, certainly in northern Delaware and in Wilmington, and a heavy voter turnout is expected. So we'll bring you up-to-the-minute reports throughout Saturday evening. Now, we'd like to introduce the Democratic candidates for Newcastle County Executive. First, on my far right, Miss Beverly Baxter, a community activist from Brandywine 100 and was administrative assistant on zoning and environment for County Executive Rick Collins. The Reverend Jesse Walker, the pastor at the Community United Methodist Church in Chester and was the minister of Mount Joy United Methodist Church in South Wilmington for 10 years. And finally, Joseph Toner, Newcastle County Councilman and the Majority Leader on County Council. And again with us to question the candidates, Janine Jaquet, our political correspondent, and John Taylor from the Wilmington News Journal papers. Let's start, first of all, thank you for coming on the program. And let's start the questioning so we can get a few questions in with Janine.
Thanks, Pat. Mrs. Baxter, you have recommended adding as many as 20 officers to the county police force. How would you, as county executive, propose to pay for the additional salaries and associated costs? Would it be through raising taxes or cutting elsewhere in the budget? And if you would cut, where would you cut?
It wouldn't be either one of them. Rather than raising taxes, what we need to find in Newcastle County is an inflation-sensitive source of income that the state can share with the county. Whether it's sharing the transfer tax or some other form of tax, we need this inflation-sensitive income, not just to pay for increase in the police force, but because every year we face either cutting services or raising property taxes, and we need another source of income for the county. Another alternative, though, is that we have, in the combination of the Prothonotores Office, Register and Chancery, and the Sheriff's Office, approximately $2.5 million that the county pays for services that are really state services. There's no line of command through the county. There's no responsibility to the county government. It's a state service, and it's a bill that the state should pick up rather than the county.
Mr. Taylor.
Mrs. Baxter, you used the interesting word inflation-sensitive. A wage tax is inflation-sensitive, and I'd like to ask all three candidates whether they would support a wage tax for county government.
I will support a wage tax for county government if it's for the good of the county, as I think every citizen of the county would.
No, John.
No at all. If I could change subjects just quickly, another very controversial issue facing Newcastle County Council right now is the expansion of the Chessie System rail yard in Ellesmere. I would like to ask each of you to tell me whether you would favor the Chessie expansion, and if so, why, and if not, why not?
We could start this time, perhaps to the right. Mr. Toner, you got to respond first to that one, please.
John, I have been opposed to the present request for rezoning from the very beginning, when the county executive and his zoning advisor recommended that Nelia Biden Park be included in the rezoning. It was my amendment that removed that parkland from consideration. I have communicated with Chessie on several occasions, and I have argued with Chessie that there are many things that they could do for the residents in that community where they could be an acceptable neighbor. Chessie has chosen not to do this, and I think the latest thing that happened was the decision yesterday to allow them to build in the floodplain based on the decision of one person and not giving members of county council an opportunity to react to something that this is so important to so many people.
Okay, Reverend Walker.
Well, I think it's a situation where the council, again, has floundered in leadership. There is a Democratic majority in the council. I think they could have done more to be responsive to the community itself and listening to the concerns of the community before we have the split between the community, the company, and the county that we have now. It's another example of lethargy that exists in the county government itself.
Yeah, but would you support the expansion, or wouldn't you?
At the present rate that it's going, I would not. I would support the community. I'm for the neighborhoods, and I think the neighborhood's been neglected. Under ordinary circumstances, I think the expansion could have taken place without the kind of conflict we're having now, and that's where leadership comes in.
Ms. Baxter.
One must recognize that because of the economic feasibility of this plan, Chessie can profitably operate the plan 80% of capacity with the given land that it has now. It does not need to take additional land through rezoning to develop 80% of the project. So that what we need to find are ways in which we can work with Chessie to make sure that the community is protected from noise pollution, air pollution, the floodplain problem, the flooding problem, and all of this needs to be looked at. Probably the county has the greatest leverage by taking Chessie through the zoning process. But in any case, we have to look at the realistic fact that Chessie can go ahead and expand, and we have to look at how we best can provide protection to the community.
And they've pretty much indicated that without the additional 20%, they're not going to put up the sound barrier or do any of the other...
They don't have to.
No, they certainly don't.
They can, because the land is already zoned, they can do what they want to do now without any approval from the county. And so that it will require going through the zoning process for us to have the leverage to provide protection to the community.
But you wouldn't have any leverage no matter what.
Through
I mean,
the
you can't force them to do anything with the 80% of the land that they know.
Right, with what they can do now.
All right. Janine?
Mr. Walker, in your campaign, you've advocated the speedy cleanup of the waste at Tybout's Corner landfill. What specifically would you do as county executive to accomplish that, in what time frame, and how would you pay for that?
I propose that we relate closely with the existing agencies of government, that is state government as well as the federal EPA, to, as quickly as possible, establish clear guidelines in order that we can begin cleanup. The EPA, as a result, I think, primarily of my raising this issue, has already ordered 2 banned waste dumps over wells. The cleanup itself is a very intricate process. There are many approaches that could be taken. I would personally advocate the proper use of technology. That is, instead of using robots to rebuild cars and what have you, the robots and the futuristic thought in what we now call the information society should be used to clean up waste dumps and things of this nature.
How would we pay for that, though?
I think I agree with the Philadelphia Inquirer's editorial that it's a federal problem, not a local problem, because the dumping took place at a time when we were not aware. But at the same time, we do have to have local and state cooperation in order to get it done.
I guess my question is still, what can you as county executive do to help speed up this process? I choose this issue because this is the one you have chosen to run on.
Well, thank you, Ms. Jaquet. I think even as a candidate, I've already taken initiative to see that we have clean water in this county. And if persons vote for my opponents, who have both been in county government, one 17 years, one 6.5 months, over the environment, and did not address this issue, nor did they care to even go to the Artesian Water Company or the Suburban Water Company, or to see whether we have testing facilities. The concern is a very vital one. And I think the perception of leadership is what the resident of this county should look at.
Can I just, was that an answer, the answer you were seeking?
That's fine, thank you.
That's the answer, fine. John?
Again, to all 3 candidates, and maybe start with you, Reverend Walker. Do you think there should be a, a zoning moratorium in the Concord Pike and the Pike Creek Valley areas? Are those areas just overloaded now?
In reference to population?
In terms of population and traffic and commercial development? Should there just sort of be a hold there in those two areas for a while?
Well, I advocate comprehensive planning for every neighborhood. I think, as you can see, I'm an independent candidate in as much as I'm not allowed to any contractors or the major industries. I can speak forthrightly. The master plans for the development of the county should be one that we all should have a right to know. It should not be something that's privy to the industries or to the paper or to contractors. I think every citizen should know how their county is being developed and where these kind of plans are taking place and where the zoning...
I'm going to interject here because we have to try to keep the responses as short as possible, but I think, Mr. Taylor, the question to you, sir, was, should there be some kind of hold or moratorium on development within those areas, Pike Creek and up along the Concord Pike? And your answer to that is?
I think that there should be, if there's a problem coming from the neighborhoods, there should be a hold on it.
Do you hear of a problem?
I haven't. The first response was from you.
Mr. Toner.
Oh, yes. Our comprehensive plan should have been updated 2 years ago at the very latest. It should have been done. We do have a problem up there, John. Unfortunately, our county is not allowed to develop county-wide. We don't have a spot here and a spot there. People seem to congregate. When something gets going, it seems almost as if you're on a roll. We have been very conscious of both of these areas. We have worked very hard and depended on the State Highway Department to guide us as far as traffic is concerned. We have responded with many of the requests of the neighbors, and we have heard their cases. There is a moratorium now in effect that we on County Council all supported, the County Executive's moratorium.
Okay, Mr. Toner, thank you. Ms. Baxter, would you care to respond, please?
On the Concord Pike area, our latest traffic impact study has shown that with the improvements to Concord Pike, with Naaman's Road becoming 4 lanes, 141 becoming 4 lanes, and Silverside 4 lanes to Concord Plaza, the roads will be able to handle only the traffic produced by the current zoning. That precludes any sort of development until we look at a creative way of handling traffic in that area.
So it's the consensus then, at least of 2 of the 3 who believe there is a problem and there should be a moratorium on future development. Okay, we're like down, we're in a matter of seconds. Anyone have a quick question and we can get one quick response? Real quickly.
I think so.
No one has a quick question, no one has a quick response.
I have a response.
2?
I think my candidacy will give this county a clear purpose to rally around.
To rally around. Okay,
Yeah.
Mr. Toner?
Producing clean water.
Do you
is
think
very
yours,
important issue.
yours also?
Yes, sir, and along with making this a more exciting county, I have the experience necessary to provide the leadership.
Ms. Baxter, you've got a few seconds.
We all, of course, believe we're the best candidates.
Thank you very, very much, okay? We have run out of time, and I would like to thank our guests. First, Bill Quillen, who appeared on the first half of our program, one of the Democratic candidates running for the nomination for governor, and also the Democratic candidates for Newcastle County Executive, Beverly Baxter, the Reverend Jesse Walker, and Councilman Joe Toner. Now, we hope these past 2 nights of debates will enable our viewers and our studio audience to make a more informed decision when they go to the polls. On behalf of everyone here at Channel 12, thank you. Good night.